In our view, the future sustainability leaders are those that have the ability to combine the conviction with pragmatism, inspiring people with a very compelling vision about the future of the company, but at the same time navigating the messy realities of change and the conflicting objectives that a leadership or a board might have. That is a completely different view of leadership challenges than we had 5 or 10 years ago, when it was all built around sustainable development goals and ticking the boxes.
Welcome back, everybody. Richard Bicker, founder of Collective Responsibility, here today with another episode of the Sustainable Ambassador Podcast. Through this podcast, I'm extremely excited to be joined by nonprofit leaders, corporate leaders, people from the sustainability ecosystem who are trying to get a little bit further along in the challenges they seek. And for me, it's all about helping to equip and inspire the next generation of sustainable leaders, young students coming in, or mid-career professionals trying to figure out where do they fit. And so with that, I'm extremely excited to be joined again by Harco Leertouwer, who's the former managing director of Acre Europe, but now is the newly minted entrepreneur, founder of Cauldron. And honestly, I can't think of a better way to talk about the future of leadership than that right there. So with that, Harco, thank you very much for joining us again. It's great to have you back.
Thank you, Richard. And great to be here. Really delighted to be in the podcast today.
So as a starting point, who are you and what is the work that you're doing?
You mentioned it already. I help forward-thinking teams and companies to become great and achieve their long-term sustainability goals by finding and shaping leaders who drive transformation, navigate complexity, and deliver a lasting impact. I personally have spent about the last 20 years in executive search and the last 5 years focusing on placing senior sustainability leaders in the EMEA region. And every time when I entered a meeting with a client, I heard frustration about challenges in finding leadership that would bring a mindset of transformation, not preservation. So that is the reason why I founded Calderon Search and Advisory to find and shape leadership that moves the world forward.
So you mentioned that you've been kind of really narrowed in on this for the last 5 years in terms of sustainability CSOs. What has been that 5 years, and where do you think the current market is for CSOs, sustainability executives? We hear a lot about a pullback happening, that it's Armageddon for ESG, but are you really seeing that, or are we talking about a bit of a reset, or just people pausing to figure out what they really need? Like, where are we these days?
I would say it depends. And I think right now the market for CSOs and sustainability leaders is, I'd say, dynamic and selective. I think on one side, we see that boards increasingly recognize the sustainability as a lever for long-term resilience, competitive advantage, and risk management. But they also expect leaders to prove that ESG ambitions can translate into commercial impact. And I guess this is a result of the current political shift to the right, populism, geopolitical challenges, economical challenges. We see a change in appetite for sustainability with some companies, which is an unfortunate development, resulting in less jobs, confusions about role, ambitions, overall frustration. But we are really convinced that this is a temporary thing, because I guess the problems that we're trying to solve and the challenges that we're facing, they haven't changed. In fact, they become more severe. So this move, I think, is something which is very unfortunate. That doesn't really help. But we also see it as a sort of a reset, and probably to do things better that we may have not done right in the past years in sustainability.
Well, and I actually want to pick up on that, things that we have not done right, because I've been having a lot of conversations around, like, of course, the economy is what it is, and of course, geopolitics are what they are. But I also feel like we as an industry share some, if not a lot, of this burden, that we went a little bit too far, we got a little bit too frothy, we were making, poor placements or poor decisions in general. And again, like, not with bad intent, I would argue. Like, this is just, there was a boom and a bubble that kind of came out, and now it's kind of coming back. So how do you see that? And is it really unfortunate, or is it actually like, this is not the worst thing that could happen? We're coming back, and now we can actually figure out, like, what is truth, what do we really need, and how do we measure the impact of work?
Well, to start there, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It really depends on what do we do with this crisis. I think there is a fallback, but things will probably become better and turn out better. Which is also it's a temporary thing where we can do reset. And I guess if we talk about sort of what did we do wrong and what could we have done better, I think there's a few things. I think one thing is that there may have been a bit of an over focus on talking about sustainability rather than actually doing sustainability. I feel that a lot of companies have not been able to translate the sort of what it is in it for you as a stakeholder, as a board, as a customer, as a shareholder. So it's been very long. It's been an isolated island, if you like, of sustainability practitioners doing the right thing, but not necessarily translating it into things that could help overall the stakeholders of the company. So that's where there is a reset now. And I guess sort of the good thing that we're already seeing is that sustainability is more embedded in organizations, in teams. So where in the past sustainability used to be an isolated team, you now see that the function is being embedded. So the function is not necessarily smaller, or the team is not smaller. I guess it's more embedded in supply chain, in purchasing, in marketing, HR. So I guess that's the good thing. But we're in a transition period, and I think, you know, honestly, a lot of people don't know where this transitional period will lead to.
No, I think, and it's a great way of looking at it, like in the sense of, you know, I think there's so many things happening. It's hard to say like what is the real trend. And again, like you were mentioning the embedding, I felt like a lot of the titles maybe melted away a little bit as the KPIs were baked into traditional roles of, as you mentioned, supply chain, even somewhat on HR. We have the community end, you know, operations and building operations if you're in the building sector. Like a lot of it kind of melted away and actually codified through, you know, like just the general practice that won't be changed over time. So that's a success in itself, but we're not really counting as one because we're looking at the overall number or reduction, say, in a pure sustainability budget. But you know, like I kind of argue that maybe we're not supposed to be so separate for so long to begin with. Like maybe the goal is to take our work and make sure it has a long life outside of our work.
Agree. And if you would have asked the sustainability leader maybe 5 or 10 years ago, sort of in your ideal role, what would happen to the sustainability team? A lot of people would have said, well, actually, we would prefer our function not to be there anymore because sustainability is embedded in the organization. And now suddenly sustainability leaders are fearing for their jobs. But that, you know, that's what we've always said for a long time. We would like to be embedded in the organization. So, yeah, again, this is a transformational period that we're in, and with that comes potentially fear and challenges. We don't really know where we're heading to, but it will also be good in the end.
How is this on a sectoral basis? Because I feel like it's not all sectors are the exact same. Are there ones that you think are actually they're still going full bore, and others are pulling back, and others are seeing more embedding? Like, what are you seeing from like just a sector industry perspective?
Where we still see growth at the moment, and those are the sectors where we at Calderon Search and Advisory have most roles at the moment, is in the clean tech and energy transition. I think there's still a lot of work there. That is potentially not corporate sustainability as a function, but more as an industry, but there's still a lot of work there. We see specialized niche consultancies still doing well. And I guess the consultancy where the offering is also sort of a reporting platform. So those type of organizations. And I guess on the other side, where there is still heavy regulation, and that could be, for instance, as you mentioned, the built environment and some subsectors in consumer goods, there's still work out there as well. But overall, of course, we need to be realistic. There is a slowdown in jobs, which is not necessarily sustainability related. It's more about the geopolitical and the economical environment that cause companies to rethink about their cost base. And unfortunately, one of the first teams that companies look at are their sustainability teams.
So as companies are looking at that team, what are the impacts? We're talking about smaller teams, smaller salaries, younger people, more tech oriented, less generalist. Like what are some, I guess, some things that take place when a company's looking at that team, like that you're seeing just more generally?
A bit of a mixed bag there as well. We in general, we see teams being reduced at the moment. We see sustainability teams I've mentioned before, they are more embedded in the organization. So it looks like the team is smaller, but in fact, those functions are now in different teams. We see some reduced ambition, which again translates into smaller teams. But this is just part of the story. The other story is mentioned the industries where there is still focus. And thank God, there is still a lot of companies that have not slowed down and are not reducing their ambitions. In fact, they're gearing up because they feel that this is the time to actually to do more. It's a very mixed story, and I guess unfortunately, if we look at sort of the social media platforms, if we read a lot of, in what we see and hear in LinkedIn, for instance, we only hear part of the story, but again, we are recruiting. There is companies still out there that are hiring, but they're becoming more selective. And sort of the final thing that we see is about where does the role sit. And in our previous conversation that we had, and we are still very much advocating for that, is the sustainability leader being in the board and being member of the board. But there we see also some changes where teams or sustainability teams that are very much focused on the more compliance side and reporting side, that might shift to sit under the CFO, which again changes the composition of the team. So it's a very complex environment at the moment where a lot is changing and happening. And again, this is all caused by the latest changes that we see around us.
Sure. And I mean, in a sense, you're also talking about more the legacy companies that we knew of or that we were talking about, say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that were ramping up and now they're kind of adjusting. Do you see a lot of new entrants, like new companies coming in and starting afresh and really building new teams, or are companies that are kind of following this curve? Are they holding off a little bit? Like, where's that? Because it's not all like you won't just have all LVMH and all Nestle and all Unilever. Like, there's the next generation of companies coming in behind them. Are they following a similar trajectory? Are they looking at this differently? What are you seeing and hearing?
Yeah, so I guess what we see there is that you have a lot of companies in the startup or scale up phase, and a lot of companies that we see they really put sustainability at the core of their vision. So rather than having a sustainability team, the mission or the product or the service that they offer is very much focused on a sustainability offering. So again, there you see the sustainability function is actually completely embedded in the DNA of the company. So you see less sustainability leaders in those organizations, which is also probably part of the growth phase that they're in, and they may be different in 5 to 10 years. But what you see is that companies are hiring, for instance, their chief operating officer role is that they're looking for somebody with a CSO background, so a chief sustainability officer. And interestingly, we see a lot of people at that level interested in a more impactful organization, and that may be a smaller organization. The reason being they may feel frustrated about the pace of change and the impact that they can make in a bigger company, and actually joining a smaller team where they have a much bigger impact than they would have had in their original setting.
Actually, when you mentioned that the companies are looking for like a CEO who had a CSO maybe background, or that's kind of backwards from where we were a few years ago. So how are companies like if they're more oriented around, say, embedding sustainability versus saying having an add-on department, how does that change their, I guess, their thinking of what team they need and who they place? And then how does that impact the hiring itself? Like, is it now you're looking more at the background technical skills and less at the sustainability part? Has that flipped over, or is it kind of equal these days? What are like the trends there?
So yeah, that's an interesting one. I think if you look at the hiring itself, there's a few things to mention here. The first thing is sort of who are they looking for? More and more, and this goes for smaller companies, but certainly also for the larger ones. The technical skills, they are still important, but where 5 or 10 years ago, sort of they would guarantee the job, now they're just the entry tickets into the application process, because far more than just the technical skills, it's also about sort of being the change manager in the organization and being able to convince the board, because even if you have a very ambitious board in a company that puts sustainability high on the agenda, actually translating it into a strategy is a different story, and you still want to keep that board on the ball. The other thing that we see is sort of when our company hiring is about sort of the timing of sustainability. What's the risk of being too late, but is there also a risk of being too early? And that's possible. So if you get the timing wrong, you either waste a hire or you miss the opportunity completely. Challenging. And I guess the other thing is sort of, how do we hire sustainability? Are we still looking at job descriptions that may be 5 or 10 years old because nobody really understands the sustainability job description in the first place? Are we really, and a lot of companies that come to us, they still feel that they need to hire for just the technical skills. But again, as mentioned, there's so much more than just the technical skills that we assess on. So, and I've done a lot of recruitment in different functions industry. I think sustainability is the most complex function to hire for.
Okay. Why is that? Like, what makes it so complex?
I guess because even if we are, let's say, 10 or 15 years already in sustainability hiring, it's still relatively new. And the jobs that we're hiring now for are not the same jobs that will be there in 5 years. You could say that for other functions and other teams as well. As a result of AI, a lot of roles in organizations will change. But I guess sustainability is relatively new, it's developing, and obviously there's a big question mark at the moment, sort of in which direction are we heading. So that makes it more complex, and a lot of skills for sustainability leaders, you could arguably say, well, those are skills for leadership in general. But I guess what it makes it more complex in sustainability is that in the old setup, sustainability as an isolated island, you did not have any direct impact on the people that actually do the work. That again is changing, but a lot of the hiring processes in larger companies are not future fit. They are still the way that people used to hire 5 or 10 years ago.
They're not future fit. What about the professionals that you are seeing? Because I feel like if we're going through this time and people aren't really sure what skills are, say, necessary, which ones are going to bring the most, they're going to save the most money, make the most money. So from a sustainability professional view, what does future fit mean?
Again, it starts with obviously a sound basis of technical skills. But again, that's just the entry ticket. It's not what gets you to the job anymore. In our view, it's the future sustainability leaders are those that have the ability to combine, and this is a skill set, I guess, combine the conviction with pragmatism, inspiring people with a very compelling vision about the future of the company. But at the same time, navigating the messy realities of change and the conflicting objectives that a leadership or a board might have. So skills for future sustainability leaders, I guess the most important thing that we see at the moment is sort of, do they speak the language of commercial growth, not just environmental ambition, challenge others, and again, very likely one level up in a way that earns respect rather than resistance. And finally, sort of navigate the politics of the boardroom without losing sight of the mission. Now, that is a completely different view of leadership challenges than we had 5 or 10 years ago, when it was all built around sustainable development goals and ticking the boxes. But in our view, that's really where sustainability is heading to, and where sustainability leadership should be heading to.
I guess I got a question around that, because if you're going to become a sustainability executive who translates the work that you're doing into growth, it's like if you're a true sustainability person, you're going to struggle with that in yourself. as much as you do in the boardroom. So are we more likely to see fewer kind of mission-driven people in the space and more commercially oriented people because of that? Like, how do you see that happening? And I guess maybe within your own interviews of people, how do people reconcile that? Like, do they think that, look, I'm going to go into this big organization and any little change is a positive one, but then do they come back to you 6 months later, like, this is just not, I can't make any progress. I need to find something else. Like many I know are really struggling with that. And you put them into that boardroom. I don't know how many of them could convincingly kind of set aside their mission and just say more growth, using sustainability. So I'm curious, like what you're seeing when you're talking to sustainability professionals or the things you're hearing on the street.
I think in general, what we see, if you talk about the frustration with sustainability leaders, is a lot of organizations. So the challenge then they make when they're building that team or when they're hiring people is not being clear and honest about where they are, but potentially sustainability leaders maybe in some sort of being naive and hoping that they can change a company where the company actually doesn't want to be changed, might accept the role to then find out 6 months later that it was not the right thing. What do we see there? We see under resourcing, vague mandates, slow hiring, appointing somebody with passion but without the strategic or political skills to drive change. And I guess it's important for those sustainability leaders to ask themselves before they join a company, is there a really clear vision about where the company wants to be? It doesn't need to be all set in stone, and it doesn't need to be operationalized, because that's the role of the sustainability leader. But is the board uh, on track, and do they have a vision about where they want to be? The second question, I guess, sort of, is there a budget to achieve this vision? And I've talked with people that in their interviews they were talking about setting up a team, and then suddenly once they've started, actually it continues to be a one-person band. And with that budget, is there a really clear mandate to do the things they need to do? Now that's the tricky one, because you never, if you have 2, 3, 4, 5 interviews with a company before accepting a role, you'll never get the full picture. So some of that will develop in the first 100 days usually. But yeah, that's what we're seeing. So I guess sort of for the sustainability leader, is the company really ready for fundamental change? And do they really want to leave the world in a better place? Or is it just about a glossy report and talk about rather than actually doing sustainability?
So, I guess from the human perspective of this, what are you seeing in terms of the sustainability professionals right now, and how are they feeling like on a day-to-day? Or is this like a negative cycle that we're in right now, and people are really expressing it and feeling it and talking about it? Or are you seeing where people are kind of like grabbing us by the horn and saying, look, it's not the great time, but here's where I can make progress, and the community is actually coming together and say, this is what you can do, and they're really supportive of each other?
It is for sure, there is some negativity in this cycle, and for sure, if you read 2 or 3 stories about CSOs losing their job, you think, well, I might be the next one. At the same time, again, if we talk to clients, if we talk to our candidates, if we are in webinars, if we are at conferences, we still see some upbeat and positivity as well. And I guess that's why these sort of this networking, these conferences that people join into, the sort of sustainability gatherings that are happening are so important. And again, if I were to base my entire opinion just on what I see in my social media feed every day, I probably would get a bit negative myself as well. But there's a lot of positive things happening as well. We just tend not to talk about it as much. We and probably this is something very human. We talk about more about the things that don't go well and the things that we do not enjoy, rather than say, well, actually, for these 2 things that we've just seen, there's actually 6 things that are really going well as well. And I guess that's probably the way forward, that we sort of need to talk more about the good things, and we should not avoid talking about the things that are not going well, but it should not be the only thing that we talk about. And my feeling is that that's happening, and it's not strange that it's happening, because the reality is out there as well. But there's another reality that we probably don't talk about enough.
Do you find that is more or less true, say, depending upon the level of experience? Because like I feel like a lot of peers that I have that have been in this space for 20 years, we can kind of draw back. It's like, do you remember what it was like 15 years ago when there was only five companies? And so, we can kind of pick ourselves up with that one. We're someone who just came in the last 5 years, like, oh my God, it's Armageddon. You're like, well, actually, because it's the context matters. So do you feel like maybe it's a younger versus older executive where you see that difference, or is it maybe within executives, someone who's been in the space for 20 years versus someone who's just kind of come in the last few years? Like, does that make a difference, or is it kind of categorically all roughly the same?
We see some, and this is literally a conversation I had last week, some disappointment about joining the sustainability market at the moment, where I spoke with graduates who literally just graduated, and they're looking for the entry level role. They finished one or two internships, and they just don't find that entry level role. And people actually considering, do I want to continue working in sustainability, or do I move out? And again, a lot of that is probably caused by, in general, a slowdown in the job market. The other thing that we see is sort of those roles that 2, 3 years ago, there would be a great entry ticket for a junior sustainability professionals. A lot of those roles, if you look at more at sort of ESG analysis, more reporting roles, those roles are taken over by AI, and that's gone really fast. And I expect another wave of changes in the next 12 to 18, maybe 24 months, that a lot of those roles have completely become obsolete. On the more senior end of the market, I think with that seniority level comes some working, but also personal experience that people probably can see through it and say, well, we've had another wave. This is not the first time that we end up in economic cycle. We always see these things happening in waves. So I think at that level, you can probably look more 2, 3, 4 years ahead rather than focusing on the next 3 to 6 months. So again, it's a bit of a mixed bag, but I am concerned about the junior end of the market, where a lot of roles are taken over by AI, and hence the difficulty for that level to join the job market.
What are you seeing in terms of like the certification education market, and how are they impacted?
So if we look at the more the junior end of the market, I think every good university now offers sustainability related studies. In general, I think these are still great, and there's a wide variety. So there's some really good ones, and there's probably some that are less applicable. But obviously, and I guess that's the challenge now for the academic world. Are they fast enough to adapt all the changes that we see to the need for their programs, their curriculum? And I guess that's a bit where the challenge is at the moment, and I've seen some universities picking up on that. That the sustainability curriculum or the programs that they offer are something that would have been applicable 5 years ago, and probably less so now. So that is not changing. What means that if you are if you have ambitions to join a sustainability function more on the reporting or compliance side, probably you could do well with a different master's degree, not necessarily related to sustainability. But at the same time, the whole industry is moving forward by the people that are actually doing the work, and change the companies. So yeah, it's a difficult one to answer, to be honest, because of the pace that this is changing. And if you were compare economic studies or an accountancy or a CFA, there's changes there as well, but probably not in the pace that sustainability is changing.
Yeah, it's so different. I guess it's also like, where are you in the market? That's why I think like the people who are, say, they came up in real estate for 30 years, they transitioned into sustainability. They're a little bit more, they can weather this a little bit differently because they know the true nature of the business versus a pure sustainability or sustainable development master's student who comes out, maybe they've done a few internships, like finding that first role, it's going to be more challenging for sure. And I guess for me, it's just like, what does that mean for the certification programs and for the education groups? Because I feel like there might be a bit of a pullback. And if so, like, if there is a pullback, what do we pull back to? Are there specific skills that you would say, regardless of, the degree or the certification, that you would really focus on if you were in the space, say mid to senior level? Like, is it transformation management? Is it board executive? Like taking a board certification program? Like, where would you, if you were talking to like a mid-level, executive level professional, even in the sustainability space, like your ongoing professional development should definitely include what at this point?
What I see coming out of university is probably not really what the world needs right now. So it then sort of, the question is sort of what other skills and what other things can you learn to excel in your role, in your job. And again, for us, we see a lot of that is related to the actual working experience in a company, which doesn't mean that academic background is not necessary at all, probably quite the opposite. But it's just the sustainability programs that we see out there. There's some good stuff out there, but the majority may not feel the need, and it is really difficult because of the landscape evolving so fast, and so it's very difficult, I understand, to adapt an academic program in 6 to 12 months. So what we tell sort of people early in their career, sort of the career advice that we give. Again, the master in sustainable business or the master in sustainable development is the start, but at the same time, make sure that you're really close to the business, even outside sustainability. Maybe find that first role, something that gives you cross-functional exposures and sort of problem-solving opportunities related to ESG rather than sitting in the ESG team necessarily. But as mentioned earlier, a lot of roles are now embedded in the organization, so they may not be part of the sustainability team. But for instance, they may be responsible for non-financial reporting and sit under the CFO, but in fact, it might give you an entry ticket for your next role. And that's the other thing for people early in their career. Don't necessarily look at your first job, but sort of where could that experience in your first job help you in a 2 to 5 years time frame. I think none of us, people with 20 years experience, are still doing the same thing, potentially on the same industry like they were doing 20 years ago. So don't look at sort of that first job and that salary level and etc., but really look at where can this role lead to and how does it support my personal development in the long term. And then the final thing is sort of in terms of building that network. And again, I was speaking with a more junior candidate, just graduated, questioning if they should move into sustainability in the first place or go back into the IT environment that they initially came from. Make yourself visible, be very active on LinkedIn, think about your personal branding there. And that branding should be authentic and it should be real, but make sure that you're really visible there. Visit free webinars, go to events. There's usually better prices for students or free tickets for students, but build your network and start talking to the people that you want to reach out to. Find yourself a mentor that can support you, a buddy maybe with 5 or 10 years experience. Those are the things that help you, first of all, land in that first job, but at the same time, maybe bridge the gap between what you've learned in university and what you actually need when you're on the work floor.
For the more senior executives, is now a good time to kind of grab the title of CSO? Like, since they're not going to fill the position, since it's not a huge emphasis, is now a good time to maybe stretch yourself and taking that on, like, we know you're not ready for it. Like, is now a good time as an executive who's interested in this? Like, would you recommend just taking on an extra title so that way you can kind of like going back 10 years, take on the extra title just to make that headway until the resources return? Or is now a better time to just fight for that role and weather the storm?
It's a difficult one because if you fight for the title and you may get that title, but doesn't really change your mandate and your role. So what we do see is this period of reset really helps people to rethink their mandate and rethink the work that they do. In general, I would say the current challenges in trading environment, in the geopolitical challenges will have a positive impact. So if there is a time as a sustainability leader to learn and to really make change, it's probably now. How do you navigate change? How do you navigate how do you sort of reach your goals with less budget, with less mandate available, and still make that impact? So it may not be a great time, but looking back in 2 or 3 years, you might actually say, well, I've learned a lot in that crisis during that time, navigating all the challenges that were out there.
All right, we're kind of wrapping up here. A couple questions around, if you're talking to a firm and you're providing like they haven't even started this journey. How do you get started in this time of uncertainty? And how do you like, let's assume that the world gets a lot easier. Like, the geopolitics eases back a little bit, the economy opens up a little bit more resources coming in. Like, how should they plan for growth a little bit differently than they said maybe 5 years ago when it was just boom time?
The first thing that we always ask is why. We start with the why, and really understand why are they into it, why are they doing what they're doing, and how do they want to do things better. We can quickly get an idea about sort of where's the company in terms of their ambition level. Do they really want to do good and become better and help to leave a better world, or do they just want somebody sort of window dressing and tell the story but actually not doing it? So that tells you something about the ambition level of an organization. Now, if we then start talking about building that team, assuming maybe there's no team yet, or there's some people that have been doing some reporting work, but there's no clear strategy. We then try to find out sort of, is there a clear vision of where they want to be in terms of their sustainability strategy? And that should be obviously completely linked to the overall company strategy. And then we ask the questions that we talked about earlier, sort of, is there a clear vision? Is there a mandate? Is there budget available? And then sort of, when is the right time of hiring that we talked about earlier as well? If you're too early, or are you too late? Probably you better be too early than too late. But if you're too early, you might hire the wrong people, or you might hire the right person. But because you're just not ready as an organization, the person leaves too early. In general, we always advise to have sustainability as high in the organization as possible. And in our view, sustainability sits at board level, but there are situations that you can think of that sustainability actually should be part of the CFO mandate. And it depends on the type of organization, the industry that you're focusing on, the supply chain, very supply chain heavy or less. So all these things come into play. We always advise with a senior leader, that person can then operationalize the strategy and make it work, and from there out, building out the team with technical skills and technical specialists. So, but again, there's a lot of factors that determine, and we always try to dig deeper and find out why people do what they're doing, rather than answering the questions straight away.
Well, I guess as a last question, how has this changed your own business? I mean, I feel like, a couple of years ago, you're probably accepting a lot more JDs and just going and finding the right people. But now I feel like you're doing a lot more work to figure out what people really need. So how has this changed, like the work that you're doing, and what are you learning through that process?
So one of the first thing when I founded Calderon, and we're a team of 5, we're really serious about the impact that we want to make. And I guess transitioning from an incoming job market where you could wait for the business to come, versus you need to go out now. We are more selective on the type of work that we do, and we really want to make an impact. And we don't want to have internal discussions about, do we really want this client? Is it really ethical to work on this mandate? Is this company really make an impact? So we find these things important, but it's for us easier to make a sort of shift in the beginning already, and work for roles that really make an impact. And the only reason why we do that is because the candidates that we represent and the leaders that we represent, they're all about making an impact. So it doesn't make sense to work on roles that where you know in advance that your candidates are going to be disappointed. Now, you might think in the current job market that's challenging because you may be rejecting more work. It actually helps us to stay focused on the work that we really want to do and do the right thing, and that helps our positioning as well. So it's the right thing to be more selective. Working with clients has changed as well. Uh, there may be the perception that there's loads of candidates available because of the current job market. And that's actually not true, because you need to dig deeper now to find the right candidates that have the right motivation to join a company or a role. And a lot of candidates may be more hesitant to change because of the current job market. So in my 20 years of experience, it's never been an easy job market. There may be more mandates coming in, and sometimes there's more candidates available, but in the end, sort of, it's always the same principle: matching the right candidate with the right client. And especially in sustainability, is something that really needs expertise and in-depth knowledge of the market space. And I guess from our side, sort of really being hungry to understand the company, to understand the mandate, and really understand the impact that a company wants to make.